Claire had long stopped expecting warmth from David. Their conversations had dwindled into routine exchanges, brief, obligatory check-ins that held no real meaning. He was always busy, his mind occupied with work, emails, and late-night phone calls that left her eating dinner alone more often than not. When they did speak, it was about bills, schedules, and practicalities, never about feelings, dreams, or anything that once made them a couple. The silence in their home was deafening, filled only with the echo of what used to be. Claire wasn't sure when she had stopped trying, but she knew she had. She still did everything a wife was supposed to do: cooked, cleaned, smiled at the right moments, but there was no affection behind it. No sense of being seen. At first, she told herself it was normal, that all marriages lost their spark over time. But late at night, lying in bed while David typed away on his laptop beside her, she felt like a ghost in her own home. She didn't crave grand gestures or sweeping romance. Just acknowledgement, someone to notice her, to ask how her day had been and genuinely listen. That was all it took to make her vulnerable to Dylan's attention. Dylan had always been adrift, a man caught between the expectations of adulthood and the weight of his own uncertainty. His life had no real direction, job applications left unanswered, ambitions that felt more like distant fantasies than tangible goals. He moved through his days aimlessly, waiting for something, anything, to make him feel like he belonged. The house he shared with David never felt like home. It was simply a place where he existed. An invisible presence in the background of a family that had never quite been his. David treated him with polite indifference, acknowledging him only when necessary. It wasn't hostility, just disinterest, as if Dylan's presence was an afterthought rather than something meaningful. But Claire, she noticed him. She asked how he was, listened when he spoke, and for the first time in a long while, he felt seen. It started with small things: an encouraging smile when he mentioned an interview, a shared laugh over a silly observation, the way she looked at him like he was someone worth paying attention to. It was intoxicating, that simple warmth, something he hadn't even realized he'd been starving for. He found himself gravitating toward her, lingering in the kitchen a little longer, catching glimpses of her when she wasn't looking. She, too, seemed drawn to him, as if she needed something just as badly. And in that quiet ache, that shared loneliness, something dangerous began to bloom, an unspoken longing neither of them had the strength to resist. For the first time in years, Claire felt something close to happiness, not the deep, lasting kind she once believed in, but a fleeting rush, a quiet thrill that made her feel alive in a way she had almost forgotten. With Dylan, every stolen glance, every lingering touch carried an unspoken promise, something that set her pulse racing. The secrecy wrapped their moments in gold, turning ordinary interactions into something electric. Folding laundry became an excuse to stand a little closer, brushing fingertips over fabric that neither of them really cared about. Brewing tea turned into whispered conversations in the dim glow of the kitchen, where the space between them felt impossibly small. At night, lying beside David, Claire would replay those moments, tracing over them in her mind like a favorite passage in a forbidden book. She knew it was reckless, that whatever this was couldn't last, but that only made it more intoxicating. She wasn't just a wife or a woman burdened by routine. She was someone who was wanted. Someone who could still feel excitement stir beneath her skin. Dylan was different around her too. More confident, more sure of himself. She could see it in the way he looked at her, as if she were the only thing in the room. And in those moments, she let herself believe it, because even if it was an illusion, even if it was built on borrowed time, it was better than the emptiness she had known before. The thrill of secrecy was exhilarating, until it wasn't. Claire had convinced herself that as long as they were careful, as long as they played their roles convincingly, no one would ever suspect a thing. But deception, no matter how skillfully woven, always left threads loose enough to unravel. It started subtly, Bella's curious glances, the way her questions lingered a little too long when Claire brushed them aside. "You seem different," Bella had said one morning over coffee, her eyes searching. "Happier," Claire had laughed, light and dismissive, but the comment stayed with her long after Bella left. Then came Daphne. If Bella was cautious in her observations, Daphne was the opposite, sharp-eyed, unrelenting. She arrived one afternoon unannounced, a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes as she greeted Dylan. "You've been distant," she mused, tilting her head. "What's changed?" Her presence sent ripples of unease through Claire, but it wasn't until the first text message arrived that the real panic set in. "Does David know?" Attached was a blurry photo, Claire and Dylan in the garden. Their hands just a little too close. Their bodies angled toward each other in a way that betrayed the careful distance they had tried to maintain. The message was unsigned, but she knew who it was from. Claire's fingers trembled as she showed Dylan the screen. Their illusion of control had been shattered. Someone had been watching, and now, the game had changed. The fear of being discovered was one thing. The fear of being left behind was another. Claire had told herself that what she and Dylan had was temporary. A fleeting escape from the quiet loneliness of her marriage. But as the walls began to close in, she realized she wasn't ready to lose him. She had spent so long being invisible, merely existing in a life that no longer felt like her own, that the idea of returning to that emptiness was unbearable. Dylan saw her, wanted her, and she had clung to that feeling like a lifeline. Yet she wasn't the only one holding on. Dylan had grown more restless, his eyes darkening whenever she hesitated, his touch lingering as if he were afraid she might disappear. When she tried to put space between them, he found reasons to close the distance again. "Why does it have to be like this?" he asked one night. His voice low, edged with frustration. "Why do we have to hide?" She had no answer, only the unspoken truth that she feared losing him just as much as he feared losing her. But the weight of their secret was pressing down on them, and the more they tried to ignore it, the more it consumed them. Daphne's threats weren't just about exposure anymore. They were a reminder that what they had wasn't real, that it couldn't last, and yet, even as the foundation of their affair crumbled beneath them, neither of them could bring themselves to let go. The truth unraveled like a thread pulled too tightly, snapping under the weight of its own deception. David stood in the kitchen, his face drawn in shadow, his grip white-knuckled around his phone. The silence between them was suffocating, heavy with the weight of what had just been revealed. The image on his screen was damning, Claire and Dylan, caught in a moment that should have never existed. "You betrayed me." David's voice was raw, quiet in a way that was far more terrifying than if he had shouted. "Both of you." Claire opened her mouth, but there were no words that could soften the blow, no excuses that could make this anything other than what it was. Dylan stepped forward, his voice pleading, but David cut him off with a single, searing look. "Don't, you're no son of mine." The words landed with finality, a sentence handed down with no hope of appeal. Dylan flinched, his jaw tightening, but he didn't argue. He knew there was nothing to say. David turned to Claire next, his eyes unreadable. "I trusted you." It was the trust, not just the love, that had shattered, and Claire knew there was no putting the pieces back together. The home she had built, the life she had once known, had collapsed in a matter of minutes. "Pack your things," David said, his voice hollow. "Both of you." And just like that, the affair that had once felt intoxicating was now nothing but wreckage. The aftermath was worse than Claire had imagined. It wasn't just the loss of her marriage, her home, or the quiet life she had once thought she could endure. It was the way everything had turned to ruin so quickly. Like a house collapsing in on itself. She had lost David's trust, Dylan's presence, and the illusion that what they had meant something more than a reckless mistake. But the worst part wasn't what was already broken. It was what came next. Daphne was missing. Claire first heard it from Bella, whose voice was sharp with urgency over the phone. "Have you seen the news?" she asked breathlessly. Claire hadn't. She had spent the morning drowning in her own thoughts, replaying every choice that had led her here. But when Bella told her, she felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Daphne had vanished without a trace, last seen the night she had threatened to expose everything. Claire's stomach twisted as the truth she had been avoiding surfaced. She had ignored the warning signs in Dylan. The flashes of possessiveness. The way his desperation had started to look more like control. But now, her thoughts raced in a terrifying direction. What if he had done something? When she confronted him, his answer was quiet, chilling in its simplicity. She won't be a problem anymore. Claire's breath caught in her throat. The secret they had been trying to bury had taken on a new, far more dangerous shape. The wreckage of Claire's choices lay before her. But for the first time in weeks, the chaos had settled into silence. The house that had once been hers was empty now. The life she had built with David reduced to memories she wasn't sure she wanted to keep. Dylan was gone, vanished without a word, leaving behind nothing but unanswered questions and the gnawing weight of doubt. She had loved him, at least. She had convinced herself she had. But standing at the edge of it all, she wondered if love had ever truly been part of it, or if she had simply clung to the only thing that had made her feel seen. Rumors of Dylan reached her in whispers. A new city, another scandal, another woman left in ruins. She told herself it didn't matter anymore, that she had escaped just in time. But deep down, she knew the truth. She had been one of them. Just another thread in his tangled web. One evening, Bella sat beside her on the porch, the sky burning orange with the last light of the day. "Do you regret it?" she asked softly. Claire thought for a long moment before answering. "I regret trusting him," she admitted, "but I don't regret wanting more." Bella nodded, as if she understood. The past couldn't be undone. But as Claire watched the sun dip below the horizon, she realized the future was still hers to shape. And that, at least, was something. In today's world, where emotional disconnection is more common than ever, Claire's story serves as a warning about seeking validation in the wrong places. Loneliness can make even the most rational person vulnerable to temptation. But true fulfillment doesn't come from secrecy or fleeting passion. It comes from honest self-reflection and meaningful connections. If you feel unseen in your relationship, address it openly rather than escaping into something that will only bring regret. Trust your instincts when someone seems too good to be true. And remember that real happiness isn't found in forbidden moments, but in choices that bring lasting peace.